Captain Veltar pressed his thin fingers against the smooth control panel of the mining ship, Gentle Current. The blue crystals on his forehead glowed softly as he watched the asteroid field through the main screen. His crew of 12 had been working here for 3 months, carefully extracting rare metals from the floating rocks. The Cathara people never took more than they needed, and they always left the ecosystem intact. The bridge was quiet except for the soft humming of the ships. Engines. Engineer Narration sat at her station, monitoring the mining equipment with her usual calm precision. Communications Officer Tervile checked the long-range sensors every few minutes. Though they had not seen another ship in weeks, this was exactly how the Cathara liked it. Peaceful, orderly, and far from the conflicts that plagued other parts of the galaxy. Veltar's people had evolved past violence thousands of years ago. Their homeworld was a gentle place of crystal forests and singing waterfalls, where art and philosophy mattered more than weapons or conquest. They had joined the galactic community as traders and artists, offering their beautiful creations in exchange for technologies they could not develop themselves. War was something they read about in history books, not something they understood or prepared for. The first sign of trouble came when Tervile's sensor board lit up with red warning lights. The young officer's crystalline features darkened with confusion as she studied the readings. "Captain, I'm detecting multiple hyperspace signatures approaching our position," she reported, her melodic voice carrying a note of concern. 17 ships moving in formation. Veltar moved to her station and looked at the display. The approaching vessels were large and moved with military precision. Their energy signatures were unlike anything in the Cathara database, but the formation pattern was unmistakable. This was a war fleet. "Can you identify their species or intent?" Veltar asked, though he already suspected the answer would not be good. Tervile worked at her controls for several minutes before shaking her head. "The ships are using military-grade signal dampeners. I cannot penetrate their communications or get detailed scans. But Captain, the energy patterns match reports of Rex Dominion vessels." The name sent a chill through everyone on the bridge. The Vrex Dominion was known throughout the galaxy as a militaristic empire that conquered weaker species and stripped entire star systems of resources. They took prisoners as slaves and showed no mercy to those who could not defend themselves. The Cathara had heard stories of entire civilizations disappearing after Vrex fleets arrived in their space. "How long until they reach us?" Veltar asked, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his chest. 18 minutes at their current speed, Tervile replied. Veltar looked around the bridge at his crew. They were scientists, artists, and engineers, not soldiers. The Gentle Current had no weapons, no shields, and no way to outrun military vessels. Their ship was designed for careful work in asteroid fields, not for escaping predators. "Send a message to the nearest Cathara colony," Veltar ordered. "Tell them what is happening here." "Captain, the nearest colony is 47 light-years away," Engineer Narration said quietly. "Even if they sent help immediately, it would take weeks to reach us." Veltar closed his eyes and felt the weight of responsibility for his crew's lives. These were good people who had never hurt anyone, who had families waiting for them at home. They deserved better than to become victims of the Vrex war machine. The enemy fleet dropped out of hyperspace exactly when Tervile had predicted. 17 ships appeared on the main screen, their dark hulls bristling with weapons. The largest vessel was easily 10 times the size of the Gentle Current, and even the smallest ships in the formation could have destroyed the mining vessel without effort. A harsh voice filled the bridge as the Vrex opened a communication channel. The alien who appeared on their screen was clearly reptilian, with scales covering his face and sharp teeth visible when he spoke. His uniform was black with crimson markings, and his eyes held the cold look of someone who enjoyed causing pain. "Attention mining vessel," the Vrex commander said in Galactic Standard language. "This is Commander Zactor of the Vrex Dominion. You are trespassing in territory claimed by the Dominion. Prepare to be boarded and processed. Veltar stepped forward, trying to keep his voice calm and diplomatic. Commander, this asteroid field has not been claimed by any government. We are conducting legal mining operations under galactic commerce laws. We mean no harm and are willing to leave if there has been a misunderstanding. Zactor's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. There is no misunderstanding, Crystal Face. This system now belongs to the Dominion, along with everything in it. That includes your ship, your cargo, and your crew. You will surrender immediately or be destroyed. We are a civilian vessel with no military value, Veltar tried again. We have women and children aboard. Surely there is some arrangement we can reach. Children? Zactor's eyes lit up with cruel interest. Even better. Young slaves bring higher prices in the markets. You have 5 minutes to shut down your engines and prepare for boarding. Resist and we will take you anyway, but you will not enjoy the experience. The communication channel closed, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Veltar looked at his crew and saw his own despair reflected in their faces. They all knew what happened to species enslaved by the Vrex. The lucky ones died quickly. The few. Others spent the rest of their lives in chains, working in mines or factories until their bodies gave out. Captain, Terval said quietly, I'm detecting boarding craft launching from the Vrex ships. They will reach us in 3 minutes. Veltar made a decision that went against everything his peaceful people believed in. He moved to the communications console and began broadcasting on all available frequencies, including some that were restricted to military use. If they were going to die or be enslaved, at least someone would know what happened here. This is Captain Veltar of the Cathara. Mining vessel Gentle Current, he broadcast into space. We are under attack by Vrex Dominion forces in the Kepler system. They are taking civilian prisoners as slaves. We have no weapons and cannot defend ourselves. Please, if anyone can hear this message, we need help. Among the many frequencies he used was one that few civilian captains even knew existed. It was a channel reserved for something called the Deathworld Alliance, though most people dismissed stories about such a group as myths. The rumors spoke of species from worlds so dangerous that they had become apex predators themselves. Veltar had never believed such stories, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The Vrex boarding craft attached to the Gentle Current's hull with loud metallic clangs. Cutting tools began slicing through the outer airlock as Veltar continued his broadcast, adding video feeds from the ship's external cameras. If help was coming, whoever responded would need to know exactly what they were dealing with. The first Vrex soldiers came through the breach, wearing heavy armor and carrying weapons designed to subdue rather than kill. They wanted their prisoners alive and healthy for the slave markets. Veltar and his crew were herded into the cargo bay, where they were forced to kneel while more soldiers searched the ship. Commander Zactor boarded personally to inspect his prize. He walked among the captured Cathara like a farmer examining livestock, occasionally prodding someone with his weapon or making notes on a datapad. Excellent specimens, he told his soldiers. The adults will work well in the deep mines, and the younglings can be trained for domestic service. This ship will be stripped and sold for scrap. The asteroid field will be mined properly by Dominion. Equipment. What none of the Vrex realized was that every word, every casual act of cruelty, was being recorded and transmitted along with Veltar's distress call. The message was spreading through space at light speed, carrying with it proof of what had happened to the peaceful mining crew. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, something far more dangerous than the Vrex Dominion was listening, and it was not pleased with what it heard. 3 days had passed since the Gentle Current sent its desperate message into the void. The Vrex Dominion fleet remained in the Kepler system, methodically stripping the asteroid field of valuable minerals while their prisoners waited in them holding cells of the command ship. Commander Zactor was pleased with the operation. The Cathara slaves would fetch good prices, and the mining equipment his engineers had salvaged would be useful for future operations. What Zactor did not know was that his fleet was being watched. At the very edge of the star system, hidden in the shadow of a dead planet, something had been observing them for the past 18 hours. The watching presence had studied their ship configurations, counted their weapons, and recorded their patrol patterns. Most importantly, it had received every second of Captain Veltara's distress transmission, the UES. Retribution dropped out of hyperspace like a predator emerging from tall grass. The massive ship was unlike anything the Vrex had encountered before. Its hull was black as the space between stars, covered with angular armor plates that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. No decorative markings adorned its surface, no bright colors announced its presence. This was a vessel built for one purpose, and that purpose was written in the lines of its weapon-heavy design. Admiral Kate Morrison stood on the bridge of her ship, studying the tactical display with cold blue eyes. She had served in the Terran Defense Force for 37 years, fighting in conflicts across 3 sectors of the galaxy. She had seen what happened when civilized species encountered predators like the Vrex, and she had long ago decided that someone needed to even the odds. Morrison was not tall, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle that mattered. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple style that spoke of function over form, and her uniform bore only the essential markings of rank and service. She did not need decorations to command respect from her crew. Her reputation did that for her. Status report, Morrison said to her tactical officer. Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner looked up from his console. 17 Vrex vessels detected, Admiral. 3 heavy cruisers, 8 destroyers, 4 support ships, 1 command carrier, and 1 prison transport. They're maintaining a standard patrol formation around the asteroid field. Any sign they've detected us? Negative. We're running silent and using the planet's gravity well to mask our signature. They have no idea we're here. Morrison nodded and turned to her communications officer. Have we received confirmation from the other ships? Yes. Admiral, replied Commander Lisa Rodriguez. All vessels report ready and in position. The stealth fighters are holding at the coordinates you specified. Morrison allowed herself a small smile. The humans had not come alone. 17 Vrex ships were about to discover that they had walked into a carefully prepared trap. Hidden throughout the asteroid field, powered down and invisible to enemy sensors, 43 human vessels waited for her signal. Some were warships like the Retribution, bristling with enough firepower to level a small moon. Others were specialized vessels designed for boarding operations or electronic warfare, but the ships were only part of the response. Scattered among the asteroids, human marines in powered armor waited in the cold vacuum of space. They had been there for hours, their suits' life support systems keeping them alive while they prepared to board enemy vessels. Each marine carried enough weaponry to fight a small war, and they had trained for exactly this kind of operation. Morrison walked to the center of the bridge and activated the ship's communication system. Her message would be broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that every Vrex ship in the system would hear it clearly. This is Admiral Kate Morrison of the United Earthship Retribution, she said in a voice that carried absolute authority. Vrex forces in this system have 30 minutes to release all prisoners and withdraw beyond the heliopause. This is your only warning. The response came within seconds. Commander Zactor's reptilian face appeared on the main screen, his expression showing amusement rather than concern. The Vrex commander looked at Morrison with the dismissive attitude of someone who believed he held all the advantages. So, the stories are true, Zactor said with a harsh laugh. The galaxy does have Deathworlders lurking in the dark. Tell me, human, do you really think one ship can challenge my entire fleet? Even your reputation for savagery cannot overcome simple mathematics. Morrison studied the alien commander with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. She had seen his type before in a dozen different species. Bullies who preyed on the weak and assumed that superior numbers guaranteed victory. They never learned until it was too late that humans had different rules for mathematics. "I notice you did not answer my question about the prisoners," Morrison said calmly. "That tells me everything I need to know about your intentions." "The Cathara are property of the Dominion now," Zactor replied. "If you want them, you will have to take them. But I warn you, human, my ships have destroyed entire planetary defense fleets. What can one vessel do against 17? Morrison's smile was the expression of a hunter who had just heard her prey walk into the perfect trap. "You're about to find out," she said, then cut the communication. On the bridge of the Retribution, every officer moved with practiced efficiency. This was not the first time they had faced impossible odds, and they knew their admiral had not come unprepared. Morrison took her position at the command chair and spoke a single word that would change everything. "Execute." Space around the Kepler system erupted in light as human ships materialized from hyperspace. The vessels appeared in perfect coordination, each one taking a predetermined position that cut off every possible escape route. The Vrex fleet found itself surrounded by an enemy that had turned their own ambush tactics against them, but the larger ships were only the beginning. From hidden positions throughout the asteroid field, stealth fighters began their attack runs. These small craft were nearly invisible to Vrex sensors, and each one carried enough firepower to cripple a cruiser. Pilots like Captain Sam Gordon and Lieutenant Maya Patel had been waiting in the freezing void for hours, their ships powered down and drifting like space debris. Now they came alive with deadly purpose that Commander Zactor's confident expression changed to horror as his tactical officer began reporting contact after contact appearing on their screens. The humans had not simply responded to the distress call. They had planned and executed a perfect military operation that left the Vrex fleet with no options, except surrender or destruction. "How many ships do they have?" Zactor demanded, his voice rising in panic. "Unknown, sir," his officer replied, his scaled hands shaking as he worked his controls. "Our sensors are being jammed by some kind of electronic warfare system. I count at least 40 vessels, but there could be more." What the Vrex could not detect were the boarding pods that had already attached to their hulls. Marines like Sergeant Carlos Mendez and Corporal Ashley Kim moved through enemy ships like ghosts in the night, their powered armor allowing them to survive in vacuum and their weapons designed to cut through Vrex battle gear like paper. They had one mission: disable the ships and secure the prisoners. Before the Vrex could harm them, the battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. The humans had planned every aspect of their assault with ruthless precision that left nothing to chance. They targeted engines first, stripping the Vrex ships of mobility and trapping them in place. Then they systematically disabled weapon systems, leaving the enemy fleet helpless and blind. One by one, the Vrex vessels went dark as human boarding parties took control of critical systems. The aliens who had seemed so confident minutes before now found themselves facing warriors from a world that had forged them in fires hot enough to melt steel. Every human soldier had grown up on a planet where everything wanted to kill them, where only the strongest and smartest survived to adulthood. When the shooting stopped, 16 Vrex ships hung dead in space, their hulls breached and their crews either dead or surrendering. Only the command carrier remained intact, captured by Marine boarding parties who had fought their way through its corridors with methodical efficiency. Commander Zactor found himself kneeling on his own bridge, his hands bound behind his back while human soldiers secured his crew. The being who had seemed so powerful just minutes before now looked small and broken, his reptilian features showing the hollow stare of a predator who had discovered he was actually prey. Admiral Morrison materialized on the Vrex bridge as her transport shuttle docked with the captured vessel. She walked among the defeated aliens with the calm confidence of someone who had executed dozens of similar operations. Her boots clicked on the metal deck as she approached the captured commander. "Where are the prisoners?" she asked in the same calm voice she had used during their earlier communication. "The Cathara are in Detention Bay 7, Zactor replied, perhaps hoping that cooperation might earn him some mercy. "They are unharmed." Morrison nodded to Colonel Jake Collins, who departed with a squad of Marines to retrieve the captured civilians. She then turned her full attention to the Vrex commander, studying him with eyes that had seen too much suffering caused by beings like him. The wreckage of the Vrex fleet drifted through space like broken toys scattered by an angry child. 16 warships that had terrorized peaceful species for decades were now nothing more than twisted metal and venting atmosphere, the only intact vessel was the command carrier, held in place by human tractor beams while Marine boarding parties secured every deck. Admiral Morrison walked through the corridors of the captured ship with Colonel Collins at her side. The walls were covered with scratches and burn marks from the brief but intense fighting that had taken place during the boarding operation. Vrex bodies lay where they had fallen, their weapons scattered uselessly around them. The aliens had discovered too late that their armor and training were no match for humans, who had grown up fighting for survival on a world that wanted to kill them. "Status report," Morrison said to Sergeant Mendez as they reached the ship's detention level. "All prisoner areas secured, Admiral," the Marine replied. "We found 47 Cathara civilians in the holding cells. Most are in good condition, though some show signs of rough treatment. The ship's medical bay has been cleared, and our medics are treating the injured." Morrison nodded and continued down the corridor toward Detention Bay 7. The heavy blast door had been torn open by human cutting tools, leaving jagged metal edges that spoke of the urgency with which her Marines had worked. Inside, she found Captain Veltar and his crew huddled together in one corner of the room. The Cathara looked up as she entered, their crystalline features dim with exhaustion and fear. These were peaceful beings who had never experienced violence before their capture, and the past 3 days had been a nightmare they could never have imagined. Children clung to their parents while adults tried to comfort each other in their melodic language. "Captain Veltar," Morrison said, her voice gentle in a way that surprised even her own crew. "I am Admiral Kate Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. You are safe now." The Cathara captain rose slowly, his movements careful and uncertain. He had heard terrible stories about the species called humans, rumors of beings so violent that other civilizations feared to mention their name. The woman before him did not match those descriptions. She was clearly a warrior, but there was something protective in her manner that reminded him of the guardian spirits from his homeworld's ancient legends. "Admiral Morrison," Veltar said, his voice still carrying the musical quality of his people. Despite his exhaustion, "We received your warning broadcast 3 days ago. We thought no one would come." "We always come," Morrison replied simply. "It just takes time to do it properly." Behind her, Colonel Collins was coordinating the evacuation of the prisoners. Human medics moved among the Cathara with gentle efficiency, checking for injuries and offering food and water. The contrast between the careful treatment by the humans and the brutal handling by the Vrex was not lost on anyone present. "What will happen to our captors?" Veltar asked, gesturing toward the detention area where the surviving Vrex crew members were now being held. Morrison's expression hardened slightly. "They will face justice for their crimes, human justice." The Cathara captain did not fully understand what that meant, but something in the Admiral's tone told him that the Vrex would not enjoy the experience. He decided not to ask for details. On the bridge of the Retribution, Lieutenant Commander Turner was coordinating the cleanup operation. Human ships moved through the debris field like scavengers, collecting data cores, communication logs, and any technology that might provide intelligence about Vrex operations. Every piece of information would be analyzed and added to the growing database that the Terran Defense Force maintained on hostile species. "Admiral," Turner reported as Morrison returned to her ship, "we've recovered the complete communication logs from the Vrex command carrier. The data shows coordinated attacks on 17 different systems over the past 6 months. Estimated civilian casualties are in the tens of thousands." Morrison studied the information on her tactical display. Each red dot represented a star system where the Vrex had conducted similar operations to the one at Kepler. Mining colonies, research stations, and trading posts had been attacked without warning. Civilians had been killed or enslaved while the galactic community issued meaningless protests and empty condemnations. "What about their base of operations?" Morrison asked. "According to the captured data, the Vrex maintain a major fleet facility in the Nexus sector," Turner replied. "Intelligence estimates place their total military strength at over 300 ships." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. The numbers were significant, but not impossible. Humans had faced worse odds before and emerged victorious. The key was not to match enemy strength directly, but to strike where and when they least expected it. "Prepare a data package for transmission to Fleet Command," she ordered. "Include everything we've learned about Vrex operations, ship designs, and tactical doctrine. Also include the recordings from the Kithura distress call and our response." "Yes, Admiral." "Should I also include recommendations for follow-up operations?" Morrison's smile was cold as winter on Earth's polar regions. "That won't be necessary. Command already knows what needs to be done." 3 hours later, the human fleet began its departure from the Kepler system. The Kithara survivors were aboard medical transports bound for the nearest friendly station, where they would receive proper treatment and eventually be returned to their homeworld. The Vrex prisoners had been transferred to a detention ship that would carry them to a human facility for interrogation and trial. But before leaving, Morrison ordered her communications officer to broadcast a message on all frequencies used by criminal organizations throughout the galaxy. The transmission included footage of the battle, recordings of Vrex atrocities, and a simple statement that would be translated into hundreds of languages and spread across thousands of worlds. "This is Admiral Kate Morrison of the Terran Defense Force," her voice carried clearly through space. "The attack on innocent civilians in the Kepler system has been answered. The perpetrators have been captured or destroyed. Let this serve as notice to all who would prey upon the defenseless. Humanity is watching, and we do not forget." The message was accompanied by detailed sensor records of the battle, showing exactly how quickly and efficiently the Vrex fleet had been eliminated. Military analysts across the galaxy would study the footage for months, trying to understand how 17 warships had been defeated so completely by what appeared to be impossible odds. What they would discover was that humans did not fight fair. They fought to win, using every advantage their harsh homeworld had given them. They planned extensively, struck without warning, and showed no mercy to those who harmed innocents. Most importantly, they never fought alone. As the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving only debris and escape pods behind, word of the battle was already spreading through the galactic communication networks. The footage played on news broadcasts throughout civilized space, analyzed by military experts and debated by political leaders. The Vrex Dominion's response was swift and predictable. Fleet Admiral Corextel appeared on official channels within hours, denouncing the human attack as an act of unprovoked aggression. He demanded that the galactic community condemn the actions of the Terran Defense Force and impose sanctions on human worlds. But the Dominion's protests fell on deaf ears. Too many species had suffered under Vrex expansion, and too many governments had lost citizens to their slave raids. The footage of the Kithara rescue and the recordings of Vrex atrocities spoke louder than any diplomatic complaint. More importantly, Other predator species throughout the galaxy were taking notice. The humans had demonstrated that they possessed both the capability and the will to intervene in conflicts that did not directly threaten Earth. Slavers, raiders, and pirates who had operated with impunity for decades suddenly found themselves looking over their shoulders, wondering if their next victim might trigger a response from the Deathworlders. On a dozen worlds, in meeting rooms hidden from prying eyes, criminal leaders gathered to discuss this new threat. Some argued for increased caution, suggesting that they avoid targets that might draw human attention. Others insisted that the humans were bluffing, that they could not possibly monitor every attack throughout the galaxy. They would learn soon. Enough that they were wrong. Humanity had tasted blood in the water, and like the ancient sharks of Earth's oceans, they had developed an appetite for hunting predators. The age of unchallenged expansion by militaristic empires was ending, and a new age was beginning. An age where those who preyed upon the innocent would discover that there were things in the darkness between stars that were far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Things with human faces and the patience to plan perfect vengeance. The hunt had only just begun. 2 weeks after the battle at Kepler, the human detention facility on Titan Station buzzed with activity. The massive space station orbited a dead world at the edge of human space, far from shipping lanes and civilian traffic. It was here that the surviving Vrex prisoners had been brought to face judgment for their crimes. Commander Zactor sat in his cell, staring at the plain metal walls that had become his world. The accommodations were clean and functional, nothing like the torture chambers he had expected from the legendary Deathworlders. His captors provided regular meals, medical care, and even access to reading materials. It was almost civilized, which somehow made it worse than any physical torment could have been. The waiting was the cruelest part. Every day, Vrex prisoners were taken from their cells for questioning. Some returned hours later, others never came back at all. Zactor did not know if those who disappeared had been executed, transferred, or simply moved to different facilities. The humans revealed nothing, and their silence left his imagination to fill in the terrible possibilities. Admiral Morrison walked through the detention levels with Dr. Sarah Williams, the station's chief psychologist. Williams was a small woman with kind eyes who had spent years studying the behavior of predator species. Her job was to determine which prisoners could be rehabilitated and which posed permanent threats to galactic peace. "What's your assessment of the Vrex command structure?" Morrison asked as they stopped outside Zactor's cell. "Classic predator hierarchy," Williams replied, consulting her datapad. "The lower ranks follow orders without question, while the officers show clear signs of sadistic personality disorders. Commander Zactor is particularly interesting. His psychological profile suggests he genuinely enjoys causing suffering." Morrison looked through the transparent barrier at the alien commander. Zactor sat with his back straight, trying to maintain some dignity despite his circumstances. His reptilian features showed no emotion, but his eyes held the trapped look of a predator who knew he had finally met something more dangerous than himself. "Has he provided any useful information during questioning?" Morrison asked. "He's been surprisingly cooperative about Vrex military operations," Williams said. "I think he believes that helping us might earn him better treatment. He doesn't understand that his fate was sealed the moment he decided to attack civilians." Morrison entered the cell, and Zactor immediately stood at attention. Even in captivity, military training was hard to break. The Vrex commander had learned during his weeks of imprisonment that showing disrespect to his captors led to unpleasant consequences. Not physical punishment, but something worse, complete indifference to his existence. "Commander Zactor," Morrison said, taking a seat across from him, "I have some questions about your operations in the Outer Rim territories." "I have told your interrogators everything I know about fleet movements and base locations," Zactor replied. "What more do you want from me?" Morrison studied him for a long moment before speaking. I want you to understand something that your species seems incapable of grasping. Every civilian you killed, every family you destroyed, every child you sold into slavery, they all mattered to someone. They had names, dreams, and people who loved them. Zactor's scaled features twisted in confusion. They were prey species, weak creatures who could not defend themselves. In the natural order, the strong consume the weak. This is how the galaxy has always worked. The natural order, Morrison repeated, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. Tell me, Commander, what do you know about Earth? Your homeworld is classified as a Class 12 death world, Zactor said, reciting information from military briefings. Extreme weather patterns, aggressive native species, limited safe zones for habitation. Most civilized species consider it uninhabitable. Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. What you don't understand is that Earth didn't just make us tough. It taught us that survival isn't about being the biggest or strongest predator. It's about being smart enough to hunt in packs and ruthless enough to eliminate threats before they can strike. She leaned forward slightly, and Zactor instinctively backed away from something he saw in her eyes. Your people made a fundamental error in judgment. You assumed that because other species wouldn't fight back, no one would. You never considered that somewhere in the galaxy, there might be predators who hunt other predators. In the weeks following the Kepler incident, the effects of humanity's intervention rippled throughout the galaxy. The footage of the Vrex fleets' destruction had been analyzed by military experts from dozens of species, and the conclusions were disturbing for anyone who profited from preying on the weak. The humans had not simply won a battle. They had demonstrated tactical and strategic capabilities that rivaled the greatest military powers in known space. More importantly, they had shown a willingness to use those capabilities to protect species they had never met, asking for nothing in return except the safety of innocent civilians. Captain Veltar stood before the Cathara Council of Elders on his homeworld, delivering his report on the rescue operation. The crystalline chambers echoed with his melodic voice as he described the human response to their distress call. The elders listened with expressions of wonder and concern, struggling to understand beings so different from themselves. These humans, Elder Naltaris said, when Veltar finished his account. They destroyed an entire fleet to save strangers. What did they ask for in return? Nothing, Veltar replied. Admiral Morrison said they were simply doing what needed to be done. They provided medical care for our injured, safe transport home, and even compensation for our lost mining equipment. They asked for no payment, no territorial rights, no trade agreements. The elders exchanged glances filled with confusion. In their experience, no species acted without seeking some advantage for themselves. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The humans had risked their lives and expended considerable resources to rescue Cathara civilians they had never met. Perhaps, Elder Valenaris suggested quietly, we have found the guardians our ancient prophecies spoke of. Beings who would emerge from the darkness to protect the innocent when all seemed lost. Meanwhile, in the criminal underworld of the galaxy, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. The ruling council of the Crimson Syndicate had gathered on a hidden station in the Void Nebula to discuss the new threat posed by human intervention. These were beings who had built their wealth and power on the suffering of others, and they did not appreciate interference with their business model. The humans cannot be everywhere at once, insisted Warlord Grextel, his insectoid features clicking with agitation. They have perhaps 100 ships at most. We control thousands of systems across dozens of sectors. The Vrex Dominion thought the same thing, replied Crime Lord Vashti, her serpentine form coiled around her chair. Now their fleets are debris, and their leaders are in human custody. We cannot ignore this threat. The debate continued for hours, with some members arguing for increased caution, while others insisted that the humans were merely lucky opportunists. They would learn the truth soon enough when 3 of their major slave trading operations were simultaneously destroyed by human strike forces over the following month. Back on Titan Station, Dr. Williams completed her psychological evaluations of the Vrex prisoners. Her findings were presented to Admiral Morrison in a secure briefing room deep within the facility's command center. "The results are conclusive," Williams said, highlighting sections of her report on the main display. 87% of the captured Vrex show clear signs of irreversible sociopathic tendencies. They view other sentient beings as objects to be used and discarded. Rehabilitation is not possible. Morrison nodded grimly. She had expected as much, but procedure required proper evaluation before final judgment could be passed. What about the remaining 13%? Mostly lower-ranking soldiers who were following orders out of fear rather than conviction, Williams replied. They showed genuine remorse for their actions and could potentially be integrated into supervised work. Programs. Recommendations? Williams took a deep breath before answering. The irredeemable ones should be transferred to the maximum security facility on Erebus. Life imprisonment with no possibility of release. The others can be placed in rehabilitation programs, but with constant monitoring. Morrison approved the recommendations with her electronic signature. The Vrex who had committed atrocities against civilians would spend the rest of their lives in cells, their victims finally receiving the justice that the galactic community had been unwilling to provide. But the punishment of individual criminals was only the beginning. Intelligence gathered from the captured Vrex had revealed a network of predator species that operated with impunity throughout the galaxy. Slave traders, pirates, and raiders who had terrorized peaceful civilizations for generations would soon discover that their reign of terror was ending. Admiral Morrison stood at the observation deck of Titan Station, looking out at the stars that had become humanity's hunting ground. Somewhere among those points of light, innocent beings were suffering at the hands of predators who believed themselves untouchable. 6 months after the Kepler incident, the Great Council chamber on Unity Station buzzed with tension. Representatives from 200 civilizations had gathered for the most important session in galactic history. The massive chamber could hold thousands of delegates, but today it felt cramped as beings from across known space argued about humanity's growing influence. Admiral Morrison sat in the human delegation section, her simple military uniform contrasting sharply with the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by other representatives. Beside her sat Ambassador John Parker, Earth's chief diplomatic officer, and General Lisa Chun, head of the Terran Defense Force. They had come to address the concerns raised by various governments about human military actions throughout the galaxy. The past 6 months had been busy for humanity's armed forces. 17 major criminal organizations had been dismantled, their leaders either captured or killed. 43 slave markets had been shut down permanently. Over 15,000 civilians from dozens of species had been rescued from captivity. The human fleet had grown from a small patrol force to a major military presence that criminal networks feared and peaceful species welcomed. Council Speaker Threxnell called the session to order, his 4 arms gesturing for silence as the chamber's translation systems activated. The elderly Zentari had served as council speaker for 30 years, guiding diplomatic discussions with patience and wisdom. Today, however, his usual calm seemed strained. "We are here to address the actions of the Terran Federation over the past half-year," Threxnell announced. "Several member governments have raised concerns about human military operations conducted without council approval." Councillor Rextall of the Malari Republic rose from his seat, his insect-like features clicking with agitation. The Malari had maintained profitable trade relationships with several criminal organizations that humans had recently destroyed, and their anger was barely contained. "The humans have violated countless treaties regarding territorial sovereignty and proportional response," Rextall declared, his voice amplified throughout the chamber. They attack sovereign vessels, destroy legitimate business operations, and impose their moral standards on species who never asked for their interference. A murmur of agreement rose from sections of the chamber where representatives from species that profited from the old system sat. These were governments that had turned blind eyes to slavery and piracy as long as their own citizens were not targeted. The human crusade against criminals had disrupted business, relationships that had existed for centuries. Admiral Morrison stood slowly, and the chamber fell silent. Her reputation had grown considerably since Kepler, and even her critics knew better than to interrupt when she chose to speak. When she addressed the assembly, her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. The Terran Federation recognizes no treaty that permits the enslavement of innocents, she stated clearly. We acknowledge no sovereignty that extends to the right to commit atrocities. Any species that preys upon civilians, any government that permits slavery, any military force that targets non-combatants, will find themselves in conflict with humanity. The chamber erupted in shouting as representatives demanded to know by what authority humans claimed the right to police the galaxy. Morrison waited patiently for the noise to subside, her cold blue eyes scanning the delegates who seemed most outraged by her words. You ask by what authority we act, she continued when order was restored. By the authority of superior firepower and absolute resolve. We did not seek this responsibility, but we will not abandon it. The galaxy has a choice: police itself according to standards that humans find acceptable, or be policed by us according to standards you may find less comfortable. Ambassador Parker leaned forward in his seat, adding his voice to Morrison's declaration. For too long, this council has issued meaningless protests while innocents suffered. You debate and discuss while children are sold in slave markets. You negotiate and compromise while entire species are driven to extinction by predators you refuse to confront. The Vrex Dominion's new representative, a replacement for the captured Commander Zactor, stood to address the chamber. Admiral Kexner was younger than his predecessor, but carried the same arrogant bearing that marked his species. The Dominion had lost over 60 ships to human attacks in recent months, and their anger burned in his reptilian eyes. And what if we refuse? Kexner demanded. What if we continue to operate as we always have? Will you humans make war on every species that does not bow to your moral superiority? Morrison's smile was the expression of a predator that had cornered its prey. You will discover why the rest of the galaxy calls us Deathworlders, she replied. Simply, the threat was delivered without drama or emotion, but it sent a chill through the chamber. Everyone present had seen the footage from Kepler and the dozen battles that had followed. They knew that humans possessed both the capability and the willingness to back up their words with overwhelming force. Captain Veltar rose from the Cathara delegation, his crystalline features glowing softly in the chamber's light. As the first species rescued by human forces, the Cathara had become strong supporters of the Terran position. His voice carried clearly through the translation systems as he addressed his fellow delegates. 6 months ago, my crew and I faced death or slavery at the hands of the Vrex Dominion, he said quietly. Our distress call went unanswered by every civilized government in this chamber. Only the humans responded, asking nothing in return except that we be free to return home to our families. He gestured to a section of the chamber where representatives from 17 other species sat. These were beings whose people had been rescued by human forces in recent months, and their gratitude was evident in their expressions. The humans do not seek to rule us or exploit our resources, Voltar continued. They ask only that we be allowed to live in peace. If this council cannot provide that basic protection, then perhaps it is time for new leadership. As the debate continued, Colonel Collins entered the chamber and approached Morrison with a datapad containing urgent intelligence reports. The information it contained would change the entire nature of the discussion. Admiral, Collins said. Quietly, we've received 17 new distress calls in the past hour. Coordinated attacks on civilian targets across 4 sectors. The pattern suggests a unified response by criminal organizations to our recent operations. Morrison reviewed the data quickly, her expression growing darker with each report. Mining colonies under attack, research stations being raided, cargo vessels being boarded by pirates. The galaxy's predators had decided to send a message of their own, demonstrating that they would not be intimidated by human interference. "How many ships can we deploy immediately?" Morrison asked. 43 vessels are ready for immediate dispatch, Collins replied. "But Admiral, that means splitting our forces across multiple sectors. We'll be outnumbered at every engagement." Morrison's smile was cold as space between stars. "Then we'll just have to be more creative in our tactics." She turned back to the council chamber, where the debate had devolved into angry accusations and counter-accusations. The sight of so many species arguing while innocents suffered confirmed everything she had believed about the ineffectiveness of diplomatic solutions to predator problems. "Council Speaker," Morrison said, her voice cutting through the noise, "I have just received reports of coordinated attacks on civilian targets throughout the galaxy. 17 separate incidents in the past hour, with more expected. While you debate the legality of our actions, children are dying." The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. This was the predator's answer to human intervention. Escalation and increased brutality designed to force the Council to restrict human operations. "The Terran Federation's response will be immediate and total," Morrison continued. "Any species or organization that participates in these attacks will be marked for elimination. There will be no negotiations, no mercy, and no survivors among those who harm innocents." Ambassador Parker stood beside Morrison, adding the weight of official diplomatic protocol to her military declaration. "Earth formally withdraws from all treaties that restrict our ability to protect civilian populations. We will act unilaterally when necessary, in cooperation with allies when possible, but we will act." The council session descended into chaos as representatives shouted protests and demands. Some species threatened to sever diplomatic relations with humanity, while others quietly approached the human delegation to discuss alliance agreements. The galaxy was dividing into 2 camps, those who supported the protection of innocents, and those who profited from their suffering. General Shun activated her communication device and began issuing orders to human fleets throughout known space. Operation Clean Sweep would be the largest military action in human history, involving every available ship and soldier in simultaneous strikes against criminal targets across dozens of sectors. As the human delegation prepared to leave the chamber, Morrison delivered one final statement that would be remembered for generations. "This council has had centuries to solve the problem of predator species," she said, her words carrying to every corner of the chamber. "You have failed.